The 6 approaching ships were massive compared to the hunter vessel Jake and Zara had captured. Through the ship's advanced sensors, Jake could see that they were warships designed for planetary assault. Each one carried enough firepower to destroy a small city, and they were moving with the precision of a well-coordinated military force. Zara worked frantically at the ship's communication console, using her telepathic abilities to intercept the enemy transmissions. Her face grew pale as she translated the messages for Jake through their scanner system. The ships were not just looking for her anymore. They had orders to eliminate all witnesses to her presence on the planet, including any humans who might have helped her. Jake felt his jaw tighten as he realized what this meant. The mining station where he had delivered supplies was now in danger. Pete Williams and the other miners had done nothing wrong, but they would be killed simply because they had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. This was not just about politics or royal succession anymore. Innocent people were going to die, but there was something else in the intercepted communications that made Jake's blood run cold. Zara showed him detailed battle plans and invasion routes that had nothing to do with her capture. These ships were part of a much larger operation that had been planned for months. The ethereal Dominion was preparing to invade human space, starting with the outer colonies and working their way toward Earth. Through the scanner, Zara explained that her brother had convinced the Dominion's ruling council that humans were a potential threat that needed to be eliminated before they could develop more advanced technology. The attack on the mining colonies was just the beginning. Within a year, ethereal forces would strike at major human settlements throughout the galaxy. Jake stared at the star charts, showing planned invasion routes, and felt a mixture of anger and despair. Earth's colonial defense forces were not equipped to fight an enemy with such advanced technology. The outer settlements had only basic weapons and shields, designed to deal with pirates and raiders, not a full-scale alien invasion. Zara touched the scanner and showed Jake more detailed information about the ethereal military forces. They had hundreds of ships, thousands of soldiers, and weapons that could destroy planets. But as Jake studied the data, he began to notice something interesting. The ethereal battle plans were very detailed and precise, but they were also rigid and predictable. Jake had seen similar patterns during his military service when fighting against enemies who relied too heavily on superior technology. The ethereal forces expected their opponents to fight in conventional ways, using established tactics and predictable strategies. They had no experience dealing with the kind of creative problem-solving that humans specialized in. Through the scanner, Jake asked Zara about her people's military history. She explained that the ethereal Dominion had conquered many worlds over the centuries, but most of their enemies had been civilizations similar to their own. They had never faced an opponent that was willing to use unconventional tactics and improvised weapons. Jake began to see a glimmer of hope. The ethereal forces had superior technology, but they might not be prepared for human unpredictability. If Earth's defenders could be warned about the invasion and given time to prepare, they might be able to use their creativity and adaptability to level the playing field. But first, Jake and Zara had to survive the immediate threat. The 6 warships were now in orbit around the planet, and Jake could see smaller craft launching from their bays. These were troop transports, carrying soldiers to secure the mining station and hunt down any survivors. Zara worked with the ship's systems to access more detailed intelligence about the enemy forces. What she found was both encouraging and terrifying. The ethereal soldiers were highly trained and well-equipped, but they were also overconfident. They expected to face only primitive human resistance, and their battle plans showed that they were not prepared for serious opposition. Jake studied the enemy deployment patterns and realized that the ethereal commanders were making the same mistake that their hunters had made. They were underestimating human capabilities and treating this as a simple cleanup operation rather than a real battle. Working together, Jake and Zara began to develop a plan. They could not defeat 6 warships in direct combat, but they might be able to use the enemy's overconfidence against them. The key was to make the ethereal forces believe they were facing a much larger and more dangerous threat than they actually were. Zara used her access codes to send false intelligence reports to the enemy ships. The report suggested that the mining planet was being used as a secret human military base with hidden weapons and elite soldiers. Jake helped her create fake sensor readings that made their single captured ship look like multiple vessels moving in formation. The deception worked better than they had hoped. The ethereal commanders began to take the threat more seriously, calling for reinforcements and changing their battle plans. Instead of a quick strike against defenseless miners, they were now preparing for a prolonged military campaign, but Jake knew that their deception would only buy them time. Eventually, the enemy would realize they had been tricked, and then the real battle would begin. He and Zara needed to use that time to find a way to escape from the planet and warn Earth about the coming invasion. Zara had an idea that was both brilliant and dangerous. She could use her royal authority to access the ethereal military communication network and send a message to human space. The message would not be able to warn Earth directly, but it might be intercepted by human intelligence services who could piece together the threat. The plan required them to get much closer to the enemy's ships, close enough for Zara to establish a direct link with their communication systems. It was extremely risky, but it might be their only chance to warn Earth before the invasion began. Jake looked at the tactical situation and realized they had one advantage that the enemy did not expect. The captured hunter ship was designed for stealth and speed, not heavy combat. If they could get close enough to the enemy fleet without being detected, they might be able to send the warning message and escape before the ethereal forces could respond. As they prepared for their desperate mission, Jake found himself thinking about the differences between human and ethereal civilization. Zara's people had achieved incredible technological advancement, but they had lost something important in the process. They had become so focused on efficiency and control that they had forgotten the value of individual initiative and creative thinking. Humans, on the other hand, had always been adaptable and unpredictable. They were willing to take risks and try new approaches, even when the odds were against them. This quality had sometimes led to disaster, but it had also allowed humans to survive and thrive in hostile environments throughout their history. Jake realized that this fundamental difference might be the key to humanity's survival. The ethereal Dominion expected their enemies to behave in logical, predictable ways. They had no experience dealing with opponents who were willing to attempt seemingly impossible tasks or use unconventional tactics. Zara seemed to understand this as well. Through the scanner, she told Jake that his willingness to risk everything for people he barely knew was something her people had lost long ago. The ethereal civilization had become so focused on self-preservation and political advantage that they had forgotten what it meant to fight for something bigger than themselves. As they launched their captured ship toward the enemy fleet, Jake and Zara both knew they were probably flying to their deaths, but they also knew that their sacrifice might give humanity the warning it needed to survive the coming war. It was a risk worth taking, because some things were more important than individual survival. The ship's stealth systems activated, and they began their approach toward the enemy fleet. Jake's hands were steady on the controls, while Zara prepared to send the most important message in human history. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Two unlikely allies united in their determination to protect the innocent and preserve the future. The fight in the engine room was brief but intense. The commander was faster and stronger than Jake, but the human had chosen the battlefield carefully. The narrow space between the engine units made it difficult for the commander to use his superior reach, and the metal surfaces provided cover from energy weapon fire. Jake used every dirty trick he had learned during his military service. He threw tools and spare parts to distract the commander, used the engine's steam vents to create temporary cover, and even managed to tangle the commander's feet with power cables. The alien warrior was skilled, but he was fighting in an environment designed by humans for human use. The battle ended when Jake managed to knock the commander into an exposed electrical panel. The alien's armor protected him from serious injury, but the electrical shock was enough to disable his weapon systems temporarily. Jake quickly used restraints from the ship's security kit to secure the commander, then checked on the other. 2 hunters thought both of the other hunters were alive but unconscious. Jake had not wanted to kill them if he could avoid it, and his non-lethal approach had worked. But as he was securing the prisoners, Jake's communication system activated. Someone was trying to contact a hunter team from their ship. Jake looked at the communication device and realized he had a serious problem. The hunters had probably been expected to report in regularly, and their silence would soon be noticed. More hunters would come, and Jake doubted he could defeat a larger group using the same tactics. He hurried back to Zara and explained the situation through their communication system. Zara looked at the captured hunters with a mixture of fear and amazement. Through the scanner, she told Jake that no one had ever defeated her brother's elite hunters before. They were considered to be among the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. Jake asked Zara if she could help him contact the hunters' ship and perhaps convince them to leave. Zara shook her head and showed him images of her brother's forces. The hunters were only the beginning. If they failed to report in, larger ships would come with more soldiers and heavier weapons. But then Zara had an idea. She touched the scanner and showed Jake a complex diagram of the hunter ship systems. As a princess of the ethereal dominion, she had access to military codes and technical information that could be used to take control of enemy vessels. If they could get to the hunter ship, they might be able to send a false report and buy themselves more time. Jake thought about the plan and realized it was their best option. The hunter ship was more advanced than his own vessel, and it would be faster and harder to track. If they could capture it, they might be able to escape from the planet before more enemies arrived. Working together, Jake and Zara prepared for their mission. Jake armed himself with weapons taken from the captured hunters, while Zara used her telepathic abilities to interface with the alien technology. She was able to activate and control the energy weapons using only her mind, something that amazed Jake even more than her other abilities. They left the captured hunters secured in the Wanderer's cargo hold and made their way to the alien ship. The vessel was larger than Jake had expected, with smooth curves and a metallic surface that seemed to shift color in the light. Zara placed her hand on the ship's hull, and the main door opened silently. Inside, the ship was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The corridors were wide and well lit, with walls that seemed to be made of living metal. There were no visible controls or buttons, just smooth surfaces that responded to Zara's touch. She led Jake to what appeared to be the bridge, where multiple screens showed information in the flowing alien script. Zara immediately began working with the ship's systems, her fingers dancing across the control surfaces while her eyes closed. In concentration, Jake watched in fascination as she connected with the ship's computer through her telepathic abilities. The screens began showing new information, and Jake could see star charts and communication logs that told the story of the hunter's mission. Through the scanner they had brought from the Wanderer, Zara explained what she had discovered. The hunters had been sent by her brother to eliminate her permanently, but they were also gathering information about human capabilities. Jake's successful defense of his ship had surprised them, and they had been planning to capture him for interrogation. More importantly, Zara had learned that her brother's forces were already preparing for a larger conflict. The ethereal dominion had been watching human colonies for years, and they were planning to invade Earth's outer settlements. Zara's opposition to this plan had been one of the reasons for the coup that had removed her from power. Jake felt a cold anger building in his chest as he realized the implications. His own people were in danger, and they had no idea that a technologically superior enemy was planning to attack them. He asked Zara if there was any way to warn Earth, but she showed him that the hunter's ship was not equipped for long-range communication. However, Zara had another idea. She could use her royal access codes to send false orders to other ethereal ships. creating confusion and delays in her brother's plans. It would not stop the invasion, but it might buy Earth more time to prepare. She could also provide valuable intelligence about ethereal technology and tactic stock as they worked together to reprogram the ship's systems. Jake began to understand just how remarkable Zara truly was. Her telepathic abilities allowed her to interface with technology in ways that seemed like magic to him, but she was also incredibly intelligent and creative. She understood complex engineering principles and could solve problems that would have taken human scientists years to figure out. Zara, in turn, was amazed by Jake's adaptability and determination. She had watched him defeat 3 elite hunters, using nothing but clever tactics and improvised weapons. His willingness to risk his life to protect her, despite having no hope of reward, was something she had never encountered in her own civilization. Together, they turned the captured ship into a fortress. Jake used his military engineering skills to create defensive positions and weapon emplacements, while Zara enhanced the ship's systems with her technological knowledge. They worked for hours, combining human creativity with alien technology to create something that neither species could have achieved alone. As they worked, they talked about their different worlds and the challenges they faced. Jake told Zara about Earth's history of conflict and cooperation, about how humans had learned to work together despite their differences. Zara shared stories of her people's ancient past, when they had been more like humans but had gradually lost their emotional connections in pursuit of technological advancement. Jake began to understand that Zara was not just a princess fleeing from political enemies. She was someone who had tried to preserve the better aspects of her people's nature in the face of a civilization that had become cold and calculating. Her opposition to the invasion of human space had been based on a belief that all intelligent life had value, a concept that her brother and his followers had abandoned. When they finished their preparations, Jake and Zara had created something unprecedented, a hybrid of human and alien technology that combined the best of both civilizations. The ship's defenses were now controlled by human tactical thinking, while its advanced systems were guided by ethereal mental abilities. But their work was interrupted by an alarm from the ship's sensors. More vessels were approaching the planet, moving in the organized formation that indicated a major military operation. Jake counted at least 6 ships, all larger than the hunter's vessel. The real battle was about to begin. Jake looked at Zara and saw his own determination reflected in her purple eyes. They had become partners in a fight that would determine the fate of both their peoples. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, combining human stubbornness with alien wisdom in a way that might just give them a chance to survive. Jake was working on the ship's communication array when the proximity alarm started beeping. He looked up from his tools and frowned. The Wanderer had been parked on Kepler 442b for almost a week now, and no other ships were scheduled to arrive at the mining station for another month. Jake walked to the cockpit and checked the sensor readings. 3 ships were approaching the planet, moving fast and in a tight formation. Their design was similar to the wreckage Jake had found, but these ships were intact and operational. Jake felt a cold knot forming in his stomach as he realized what this meant. Someone had come looking for Zara. He hurried back to the medical bay where Zara was resting. Through their communication system, he quickly explained what he had seen. Zara's face went pale, and her purple eyes filled with fear. She touched the scanner and showed Jake images of armored warriors carrying advanced weapons. These were her brother's elite hunters, soldiers trained specifically to eliminate political enemies. Jake, if there was any way to hide or escape. But Zara shook her head sadly. The hunters will be able to track her life signs from orbit, using technology far more advanced than anything Jake had seen. They would know exactly where she was within minutes of landing. The first hunter ship touched, down about a kilometer away from the Wanderer. Jake watched through his ship's cameras as 3 figures in dark armor emerged from the craft. Even from a distance, Jake could see that they moved with the smooth precision of professional killers. They carried weapons that glowed with energy, and their armor seemed to shimmer and change color to match their surroundings. Had faced enemy soldiers before during his military service, but those had been humans using human weapons. These hunters were something completely different. They had superior technology, superior training, and probably superior physical abilities. In a straight fight, Jake would not stand a chance, but Jake had no intention of fighting fair. His years in the Earth Defense Force had taught him that sometimes the best strategy was to use the enemy's advantages against them. The hunters expected to find a helpless alien princess hiding on a primitive planet. They were not prepared to face a human soldier who knew every inch of his own ship. Jake quickly sealed the medical bay and helped Zara move to a more secure location deep inside the ship. He then activated the Wanderer's security systems, which were designed to protect valuable cargo during transport. The ship's corridors filled with a maze of laser barriers and motion sensors that Jake could control from his command console. The hunters reached the Wanderer faster than Jake had expected. He watched on his security cameras as they approached the ship's main airlock. The lead hunter, who seemed to be their commander, examined the human-built vessel with obvious contempt. Jake could see him speaking to the others, probably making jokes about primitive human technology. The commander gestured at the airlock, and one of the other hunters pulled out a device that looked like a cutting tool. Jake smiled grimly. The hunters were planning to cut their way through the airlock, but Jake had a better idea. He waited until all three hunters were gathered around the door. Then he activated the ship's emergency decontamination system. High pressure jets of cleaning foam erupted from hidden nozzles around the airlock, covering the hunters in a thick, sticky substance. The foam was designed to neutralize chemical hazards, but it also made it impossible to see or move quickly. Jake heard muffled shouts of anger and confusion as the hunters struggled to clear the foam from their armor. While the hunters were distracted, Jake activated the ship's cargo loading system. A massive mechanical arm swung out from the ship's hull and grabbed the closest hunter, lifting him off the ground and slamming him into the side of the ship. The hunter's armor was tough, but the impact was enough to stun him temporarily. The other two hunters recovered quickly and began firing their energy weapons at the mechanical arm. Jake watched as the powerful beams cut through the metal like butter, destroying the loading system in seconds. But the distraction had given Jake the time he needed to prepare his next surprise. Jake had spent years learning every system on his ship, including some that were not listed in the official manuals. The Wanderer had been built for cargo transport, but Jake had made some modifications over the years. Hidden in the ship's hull were several defensive systems that Jake had installed himself, using parts from decommissioned military vessels. As the hunters approached the damaged airlock, Jake activated his hidden weapons. Automatic turrets emerged from concealed panels and began firing pulse rounds at the intruders. The hunters were caught off guard by the sudden appearance of human military hardware on what they thought was a simple cargo ship. The commander shouted orders to his team, and they began to move with more caution. Jake could see that they were skilled fighters, adapting quickly to the unexpected resistance. But they were used to fighting other advanced civilizations with predictable tactics and equipment. They had never faced a human who was willing to turn his own ship into a weapon. Jake used the ship's internal communication system to create false audio signals, making it sound like there were multiple defenders moving through the corridors. He activated and deactivated lights in different sections of the ship, creating the impression of a much larger crew. The hunters began to spread out, trying to cover more ground and find their targets. This was exactly what Jake had hoped for. By splitting up, the hunters had given up their main advantage of superior numbers and coordination. Now Jake could deal with them one at a time, using his knowledge of the ship's layout to stay ahead of them. The first hunter to enter the ship triggered a trap Jake had set up in the main corridor. A section of the floor gave way, dropping the hunter into the cargo hold below. Jake had filled the hole with foam padding to prevent serious injury, but the hunter was now trapped and disoriented. The second hunter was more careful, but Jake had prepared for that too. As the hunter moved through the ship's narrow corridors, Jake used a ventilation system to fill the area with smoke. The hunter's advanced armor probably had air filters, but the smoke still made it difficult to see. Jake dropped from a maintenance shaft above and landed on the hunter's back. Using a stun weapon he had taken from the ship's security kit, the hunter was stronger than Jake had expected, and they struggled for several minutes before Jake managed to activate the stun weapon. The hunter collapsed, his armor system shutting down temporarily. Jake quickly moved to a new position, knowing that the commander would have heard the fight and would be coming to investigate. The commander was the most dangerous of the three hunters. Jake could see on his security cameras that the alien warrior was moving through the ship with deadly efficiency, checking each room systematically. The commander had learned from his teammates' mistakes and was not falling for any of Jake's traps. Jake realized that he would have to face the commander directly. He armed himself with the best weapons he had available and prepared for a fight that would determine whether he and Zara lived or died. As he moved through the ship's corridors, Jake thought about his military training and the lessons he had learned about fighting against superior opponents. The commander found Jake in the ship's engine room, where the narrow space and complex machinery would limit the effectiveness of energy weapons. For a moment, the two warriors stared at each other across the humming engines. Then the commander spoke, his voice distorted by his armor's translation system. "You are the human who found our target," the commander said. "You have caused us much trouble, but this ends now. Step aside and we will make your death quick." Jake checked his weapon and smiled grimly. "I don't think so," he replied. "She's under my protection now, and I don't abandon people who need help." The commander seemed puzzled by Jake's response. "You would die for a stranger? Your species is even more foolish than we were told." Jake raised his weapon and prepared to fight. "Maybe so," he said, "but at least we know what honor means." The alien woman's eyes opened slowly, revealing irises that were the color of deep purple amethyst. Jake had been dozing in his chair when he heard her soft intake of breath. He sat up quickly, not wanting to startle her, but also ready to help if she needed anything. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the small medical bay. She tried to sit up, but Jake gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "Easy there," he said softly. "You were hurt pretty bad. Just rest for now." He knew she probably could not understand his words, but he hoped his tone would be calming. The alien woman looked around the medical bay with wide eyes, taking in the simple human equipment and the modest size of the room. Jake could see confusion and perhaps a little fear in her expression. She spoke then, her voice musical and flowing, but the words meant nothing to Jake. The language was completely foreign, with sounds that human vocal cords could barely make. Jake pointed to himself and said "Jake" slowly and clearly. Then he pointed to her and raised his eyebrows questioningly. She seemed to understand what he was asking. She touched her chest with a slender finger and said something that sounded like "Zara" to Jake's ears. "Zara," Jake repeated, and she nodded. At least now they had names for each other. It was a start. Over the next few hours, Jake did his best to communicate with Zara through gestures and simple actions. When she seemed thirsty, he brought her water. When she appeared to be in pain, he adjusted her position on the medical bed. She watched everything he did with intense curiosity, as if she had never seen anything like his equipment or methods before. Jake had rigged up a simple scanner from spare parts to monitor her vital signs. It was not designed for alien biology, but he had modified it to pick up her heartbeat and breathing patterns. Zara stared at the device in fascination, and Jake noticed her touching it with her fingertips while closing her eyes in concentration. Suddenly, the scanner began displaying information in a completely different format. Instead of simple lines and numbers, it showed complex patterns and symbols that Jake did not recognize. Zara had somehow interfaced with the machine using only her touch and her mind. Jake's jaw dropped. He had heard rumors about telepathic abilities in some of the outer colonies, but he had never seen anything like this. Zara noticed his amazement and smiled for the first time since waking up. She touched the scanner again, and this time, the display changed to show what looked like a crude translation system working together. They slowly began to establish basic communication. Zara would touch the scanner and think of concepts, and the device would display simple images or symbols that Jake could begin to understand. It was slow work, but gradually Jake learned that Zara was not just any alien traveler. She was royalty, a princess of something called the Ethereal Dominion. Her people were an advanced spacefaring civilization that had been watching human development for centuries. Jake was shocked to learn that Earth was already known to the galactic community. But most species considered humans to be primitive and not worth serious attention. As Zara's strength returned over the following days, Jake fashioned better medical equipment from spare parts around his ship. His military training had taught him to be resourceful, and he found ways to create monitoring devices and treatment tools that worked with Zara's unique physiology. She watched him work with growing amazement. Through their improvised communication system, Zara explained that she had never seen anyone adapt and create solutions so quickly. Her people had advanced technology, but they relied on machines and established systems. The idea of building medical equipment from cargo ship parts was completely foreign to them. Jake learned that Zara's injuries were not from an accident. She had been fleeing from her own people after her younger brother had staged a coup and taken control of their government. Her brother had ordered her execution, but some loyal guards had helped her escape in a small ship. That ship had been damaged in the escape, leading to her crash on the mining planet. The more Jake learned about Zara's situation, the more he understood why she had been so surprised by his help. In her world, political enemies were eliminated without mercy. The idea that a complete stranger would risk his own safety to help someone he did not know was almost incomprehensible to her. Jake did his best to explain human concepts of basic decency and helping others in need. He told her about his military service, where soldiers were taught to never leave anyone behind. He talked about his parents, who had raised him to believe that all life was valuable and worth protecting. These ideas seemed to fascinate Zara even more than his mechanical skills. As they spent more time together, Jake began to understand some of the fundamental differences between their species. Zara's people had incredible mental abilities and advanced technology, but they had lost something in the process. They had become cold and calculating, focused on power and political advantage rather than simple compassion. Zara, in turn, was amazed by Jake's emotional responses and his willingness to help without expecting anything in return. She had grown up in a world where every action had a political motive and every kindness came with a price. Jake's genuine care for her well-being, despite not knowing who she was or what she could offer him, was something completely new in her experience. Jake also learned that Zara's telepathic abilities were not just useful for communication. She could interface with almost any technological system and understand how it worked intuitively. She helped Jake improve his ship's systems, showing him how to optimize the engines and enhance the navigation computer. In return, Jake taught her about human engineering principles and creative problem solving. One evening, as they worked together to repair a damaged sensor array, Zara asked Jake why he had saved her. Through their communication system, she explained that by her people's standards, helping a stranger was not just unusual, but actually dangerous. It could be seen as a sign of weakness or stupidity. Jake thought about the question for a long time before answering. Finally, he told her that he had saved her because it was the right thing to do, not because it would benefit him or because he expected a reward, but simply because she needed help and he was able to provide it. He explained that humans believed in something called honor, which meant doing what was right even when it was difficult or dangerous. This concept of honor, without personal gain, seemed to puzzle and intrigue Zara. She had been raised to believe that all actions were motivated by self-interest, but Jake was living proof that this was not always true. She began to understand that there was something different about humans. something that made them unique among the species she had encountered. As Zara's physical injuries healed, Jake noticed that she was becoming stronger and more alert. Her natural healing abilities were remarkable, far beyond what any human could achieve. But more importantly, she seemed to be healing emotionally as well. The fear and suspicion in her eyes was being replaced by curiosity and something that looked like hope. Jake realized that he was not just helping Zara recover from her injuries. He was showing her a completely different way of thinking about life and relationships. In return, she was teaching him about the vast universe beyond Earth and the incredible technologies that existed among the stars. Neither of them knew it yet, but they were forming a partnership that would change both of their worlds forever. Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided his cargo freighter through the dense atmosphere of Kepler 442b. The mining planet was nothing special, just another rock in space where humans dug holes and pulled out valuable metals. He had been making supply runs to this place for 3 years now, and it never got any easier. The planet's twin suns made the surface hot during the day, and the constant dust storms made landing tricky. His ship, the Wanderer, groaned as it touched down on the makeshift landing pad near Mining Station 7. Jake had named the ship himself when he bought it used from a scrap dealer on Mars. It was not much to look at, but it was his home and his way of making a living. The ship had carried everything from medicine to mining equipment across the outer colonies, and Jake knew every bolt and wire in her hull. Another day, another credit, Jake muttered to himself as he checked the cargo manifest. The miners needed food supplies, replacement parts for their drilling equipment, and a new atmosphere processor. Nothing too exciting, but it paid the bills and kept him flying among the stars. As Jake began unloading the cargo, he noticed something strange in the distance. A thin column of smoke was rising from behind a ridge of red rocks about 2 kilometers away. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant trouble on a planet where everything was dry and dusty. Jake had learned during his time in the Earth Defense Force that unexpected smoke usually meant someone needed help. The mining station supervisor, a gruff man named Pete Williams, walked over to help with the unloading. "You see that smoke over there?" Jake asked, pointing toward the ridge. Pete squinted in the direction Jake was pointing. "Yeah, I noticed it about an hour ago. Probably just another meteor impact. This planet gets hit by space rocks all the time. Nothing to worry about." But Jake was worried. His military training had taught him to investigate unusual situations, and something about the smoke did not feel right. After finishing the supply delivery, Jake decided to take a closer look. He loaded some basic supplies into his personal rover and headed toward the smoke. The terrain was rough, with sharp rocks and deep crevices that made driving difficult. Jake had to navigate carefully to avoid damaging the rover's tires on the jagged surface. As he got closer to the source of the smoke, he could see that it was not from a meteor impact. There was definitely something artificial burning on the other side of the ridge. When Jake reached the top of the ridge, he stopped the rover and stared in amazement. Below him was a crash site unlike anything he had ever seen. The wreckage was clearly not human in origin. The metal was a strange silver color that seemed to shift and change in the sunlight, and the design was completely alien. Parts of the crashed vessel were still smoking, and Jake could see that whatever had hit the ground had done so very recently. Jake grabbed his emergency kit and climbed down into the crash site. The wreckage was scattered across a wide area, with twisted metal and strange components he did not recognize. But what caught his attention was a section of the craft that looked like it might have been a passenger compartment. The metal was cracked open, and Jake could see something moving. Inside. As he got closer, Jake realized he was looking at a living being. It was definitely not human, but it was clearly intelligent. The creature was about the same size as a human woman, but her skin had a pale blue tint and seemed to shimmer slightly. Her hair was long and white, almost like silver threads, and her ears came to sharp points. She was wearing what looked like some kind of advanced armor or suit. but it was badly damaged and covered in a dark liquid that Jake assumed was blood. The alien woman was unconscious and breathing very slowly. Jake could see several serious injuries on her body, including what looked like broken ribs and a deep cut on her arm. His military medic training kicked in automatically, and he began to assess her condition. Her pulse was weak but steady, and she was losing blood from multiple wounds. Jake knew he had to act quickly. He had basic medical supplies in his rover, but nothing designed for alien biology. He would have to improvise and hope that this creature's body worked similarly to a human's. First, he needed to stop the bleeding and get her to a ship where he had better medical equipment. Working carefully, Jake used his field dressing kit to bandage the worst of the wounds. The alien woman's blood was a dark purple color, which was strange, but it seemed to clot normally when pressure was applied. Jake then used his emergency blanket to wrap her for warmth and carefully lifted her into his arms. The alien woman was surprisingly light, and Jake was able to carry her back to his rover without too much difficulty. He laid her gently in the back seat and drove as quickly as he dared back to his ship. Every bump and jolt made him worry that he might be making her injuries worse, but he had no choice. She needed medical attention that only his ship could provide. Back at the Wanderer, Jake carried the alien woman to his small medical bay. It was not much more than a closet with some basic equipment, but it was better than nothing. He had learned field medicine during his military service, and he had treated plenty of injuries over the years. This was different, though. He had no idea how this creature's body worked, or what might help her. Jake started with the basics. He cleaned her wounds with antiseptic and used synthetic skin patches to cover the cuts. He set up in 4-drip with saline solution, hoping that it would help replace the blood she had lost. The alien woman had what looked like veins in her arms, and Jake was able to insert the needle without too much trouble. As he worked, Jake found himself studying the alien woman more closely. Despite her blue skin and pointed ears, she looked remarkably human in many ways. Her face was beautiful, with high cheekbones and delicate features. She wore what appeared to be some kind of jewelry around her neck, a pendant made of the same strange metal as her crashed ship. Hours passed as Jake monitored her condition. Her breathing became stronger, and her pulse steadied. The bleeding had stopped, and some of the smaller cuts were already beginning to heal. Jake was amazed at how quickly her body seemed to recover, much faster than a human would. As the alien woman began to regain consciousness, Jake wondered what he had gotten himself into. He had just rescued someone from a completely different world, and he had no idea who she was or why she had crashed on this remote planet. For all he knew, she could be dangerous or her people might come looking for her. But as Jake looked at her peaceful face, he knew he had made the right choice. She had been hurt and alone, and he could not have just left her to die. That was not who he was. His parents had raised him to help people when they needed it, and he supposed that rule applied to aliens too. Jake settled into a chair next to the medical bed and prepared to wait. Whatever happened next, he would face it when the time came. For now, he had saved a life, and that was enough.